similar to Brett, there's like no information that at least I could find online about you. You're these mysterious people. So
Oh, that's really funny, actually.
So
That's
we're gonna
funny.
ask you a lot of very embarrassing questions.
No, that's it's interesting. I think that for being the quote unquote the name on the door, I think both Brett and I are actually quite private people.
Yeah.
really,
We're not Yeah, we're not active on social media outside of the business, and I think I mean, not to the extent that I think is quote unquote normal or typical these days, but I think we've kind of had to adjust our personal preferences in that way for essentially, the success of the business or for the longevity of the business, and so I think that's a few years ago we probably wouldn't have imagined ourselves even doing something like this as a conversation or getting out there and putting ourselves out there. But I think that's part of the game.
that's interesting. Yeah, because you
Yeah.
guys are. I mean, obviously, you're the owners of the company, the founders of the office. But there's another aspect which you're talking about, which is being the face of the company
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
being the ones
Yeah.
who probably get the work and interface with clients and do these kinds of things. And it's very
Yes.
different actually from like just sitting and designing something cool.
It's very interesting. There's the operations of the business, there's the designing of the business, and then there's, like you're saying, there's like the business development or in some conversations we kind of tease that it's like we're the brand ambassadors.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And the brand, I mean, the brand has always been just first and foremost from the inception of the firm, and so it's interesting. It's part of the development and the evolution of the firm.
Was that a weird thing? Was there a point in time when you realized, oh, there's another part of this whole formula we have to be mindful of, and now I have to? Was there pressure to kind of be a certain way or to put out
No,
a
I don't think
certain?
that's no, I don't think it's the pressure. I think that one thing you get with Brett and myself is what you see is what you get. We're pretty honest, direct people. We don't have a persona, and I think that that's part of why we love what we do is that we get to interact and establish relationships and friendships and kind of family relationships with our clients and collaborators and our team, and I think that's all a part of it. So I wouldn't say pressure is, but it's like I don't think we started the firm 10 years ago thinking, hey, we're going to have a team of 24 and we're going to be out there, promoting business. But that, in a sense, is part of what we do as owners of the firm, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Was there ever a moment in the past or currently where you thought that maybe you would, I don't know, I guess to find a third partner or someone else in the office to be the one to do all that, so you guys can stay and I don't know,
No,
do design or
no, I think that I think that maybe we didn't expect kind of the I guess the level at which we're doing it right now. But no, I think that Brett and I, first and foremost, we're friends. We've known each other, 20 plus years. We're family. I mean, I see him more than my wife or my brothers, and so he's a brother for sure. And so it's not a business partnership. I mean, technically it is, but it's not like we're at a mixer or networking event and said, "Oh, you have some skills, I have some skills. Let's start a business." I think it's much more organic than that. And so I think the idea of bringing in just your example of a third person to kind of do business development, I think that would be disingenuous to our firm and the kind of culture and what we love. So I mean, we love being out there and meeting new people, and I think it would be sad if we were kind of confined to the studio only designing in that sense. I think we enjoy it all, really.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, like, when did you guys like realize or start thinking about the fact that the office is not just the work, but it's also, like you said, a brand, and there
Yeah.
needs to be development of a certain image of that brand. Like, when did that come to the front of your mind?
From the very first conversations when we founded the firm in
Mm.
Brett's apartment.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, or whenever that moment was, it was really important to us to put out in the world the work that we wanted to attract and the people that we wanted to collaborate with. And so right from the beginning. It was a question of, okay, how do we do that? How do we represent ourselves out there, in the digital world? Because that's how people ultimately will find you first, unless it's a direct referral, and especially when starting a business. So we took our first, one thing that we're very, very proud of is that we started this firm with a $5,000 check. And I think that $5,000 we immediately invested in a website, and the graphic designers, who we still collaborate with today, they do all of our visualizations and our renderings on the website. They're two MIT architecture grads that got into visualization, and you might say outside of our clients, they were the original collaborators with us, because they helped us design that first website and business cards and everything that kind of put our brand out there. And we've kind of just evolved from there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense.
And I think the younger generations tend to think about these topics more so, sometimes to the extreme, I think, where students become enamored with figuring out their perfect office name when they're like 30 years. It's like,
sure,
calm down.
we took the easy route. You may think that we're architects or lawyers or whatever.
Yeah, but it's an interesting question in general. Like, we were speaking with another architect on the show, and he was remarking that excuse me, when it comes to designing a project, all architects know that it's a iterative process, and we try stuff, and obviously we try stuff within a certain kind of spectrum depending on who we are and our preferences and interests, but we try things over and over and over. But his question was, why don't we do that? Why don't we have that same mindset with our architecture offices? Why don't we just try something and see if it works? If it doesn't, then he didn't say it directly, but I guess rebrand or redo.
Sure.
And it's a weird kind of difficult thing, because you want that freedom, but also you don't want to be disingenuous, which you guys are absolutely the opposite of,
Yeah. I think that, you have to be genuine to your approach. And our team here is probably sick of hearing us say that, complacency is my biggest fear in business and life. I think as soon as you become complacent or try to sit back and pat yourself on the shoulder, that you're done. And so I think we're constantly trying to innovate. We're constantly trying to evolve the process. I think that was one of the biggest areas of excitement for Brett and I when we started the firm was, hey, we get to design a process. We get to design an office. Let's consider the office, the studio, as a design project, and let's take all of the ways that we approach designing a building or site planning or whatever it might be, and let's iterate. Let's talk through all the pros and cons of a system. And it's a really exciting time for us in our studio, because we're now 24 people, and we rely heavily on our senior leadership in the studio, who, a few people have been with us 9 years out of 10 years in practice,
wow.
7 years, 6 years, 5 years. Yeah. And so we have a really great foundation and a really great team. And we actually just came back Monday and Tuesday. We were out of the studio as the leadership group, kind of at a retreat, if you will. And we were brainstorming how to make this process better, because if we sit back and pat ourselves on the shoulder, we're just going to become stagnant, and we don't want to do that. We want to continue to evolve.
So, talking more about the business side then. So for those leadership kind of retreats and things, do you guys bring in someone to help you with that? I guess a business advisor, coach person?
It's interesting. We've considered that in the past. I think, again, to be genuine to our approach, for this one, this is actually the first time that we've done that as a leadership team. We were just all talking. This is a group where we've been a part of weddings and seen families grow with kids and whatnot. So it is a family environment. And so I think, I'd like to say the conversations were successful in that everyone felt like, they don't feel like they have a voice. They absolutely have a voice. And it was really just conversations. So I think in the future, we'll kind of formalize it in a sense in some ways, but then I think leaving room for just conversation between family members. Really, it's an important thing, right? And if you have a facilitator or a mediator in the room, people open up and share different things, but then they also approach it in a different way. So
Right.
I think there's value in kind of both approaches.
I think it's difficult. I think I agree with what you're saying. I can see where if you're an office and you don't have that tight knit of a group and those kinds of relationships that you guys have and you're describing, then it would be very difficult to approach, I don't know, the five people in the leadership positions who you maybe don't know that well and say, let's have a heart-to-heart conversation over this weekend. And
Well, bring some margaritas.
That's true. Business coach or margaritas.
Well, it being Cinco de Mayo. We went out. Actually, it was really nice. We went out to Brett's home in the desert Palisades, one of the firm's projects and we had lunch and we made some margaritas, and it was nice. And then, we had a really nice 4 or 5 hour conversation, and then dinner, and then a kind of recap the next morning. And so I think it's good to question process and talk about the good things, talk about things that we can work on, because, whether we're talking about a process or talking about mentoring young architects in the team, constructive criticism is a really good, we feel it's a very good and positive thing, to want everyone around us to be better and to get better. And we think that that's a positive approach, not harping on quote unquote, mistakes or whatnot, but just always trying to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, talking about your backstory, because I was saying before, I could not figure out what that is.
Your Instagram your Instagram account is private.
Anything. That's amazing.
I know.
I'm sure it's out there. Just my research skills are not high level. So, where are you from originally? What was it like growing up there? And then, eventually, obviously, when did architecture and design come into the vision?
Well, I guess the first question would be, how much time do we have?
We got plenty of time.
No, I have a varied, youth. I was born in San Francisco, and I lived there until I was about 7. And my parents got divorced. My mom remarried to an amazing person, my stepdad, who's my dad. And we moved from San Francisco to a ranch in northeastern Nevada. Okay. And then from the ranch in northeastern Nevada, I made my way down to USC School of Architecture here in LA 22 years ago. And so I've been in LA since. But I think to expand upon that a little bit, I think because of the shift from San Francisco to Nevada and then back to Los Angeles, I've been exposed to a lot of different landscapes, and just by virtue of growing up in the city, going to, my parents would take us to museums and churches and just all the cultural, institutions of San Francisco. And so I think we got that urban experience.
Wait, so you were living in the city, not? We were,
I lived in the Sunset District, so close to like Stonestown Galleria down by Lake Merced. And it's beautiful. I mean, I love San Francisco. I have family there, and it's funny when that stopped feeling like home and LA was feeling like home, but that's a whole other conversation. So we got this experience of growing up in San Francisco, and then when my parents bought this ranch in Nevada and retired, that was from like second grade until senior year of high school. And we grew up on, looking back, it's kind of a crazy fortunate childhood. We grew up on 3,800 acres in northeastern Nevada.
3,800 acres.
Yeah. And I'm the middle of three boys. And so with my brothers, we used to work the ranch. We used to fix fence and feed cows, and my mom would raise, we raised chickens and turkeys and sheep and horses. And so we had this very, working but rural upbringing, that mixed with my father moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico when my parents got divorced. And so I would spend some pretty impactful time down there, a few weeks in the summer and things like that. And so then the American Southwest just like completely imprinted on me, as well as this kind of high desert area of Nevada, because we would also drive from San Francisco to Nevada, 8-hour drive to see families. And so, driving through Nevada and just the Southwest, I think looking at our architecture and kind of what drives me personally, as well as here in the practice, those years were paramount in kind of forming my view of the world and our place in it, really, which is kind of what we architecturally really try to investigate in every project on some level, is how do we interact with the natural world through our home.
The Southwest has beautiful landscapes, and they're very, I mean, I've only visited there a few times, and actually we're doing a road trip at the end of summer.
Cool.
For a couple of weeks.
We're going to Santa Fe.
I've never been to Santa Fe.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And if you drive, from LA, it's about, I want to say it's about a 12 to 14-hour drive straight to Santa Fe. Mm-hmm. And you just see incredible landscapes through California and Arizona and into New Mexico. It's absolutely stunning.
So you experienced sort of those beautiful landscape, and then you went to study in LA, and you decided to stay in LA? Like, what happened?
I decided to stay in LA. It's really funny. So I'm glad you bring that up, because I think for the first 3 years of being here in LA at USC, I was like, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go somewhere.
I would imagine.
Also because I didn't have a car, and I think that the best, LA is a car focused city and development. So you have all these kind of city centers spread out through the LA area. And if you don't have a car or you don't know how to navigate the bus, it's really difficult to see the city. And I think I struggled with that in the first 3 years. And then just by opportunity, internships, first job, second job, and then ultimately Brett and I starting the firm, I won't say I kind of got stuck here, but I did, and just kind of the organic nature of my life has led me right to where I am talking with you.
Do you ever think about, obviously you have the office and a lot of other things, but do you ever think about moving and living more in the Southwest and on the landscapes?
Well, maybe not the Southwest, but my wife and I, who I met at USC, another part of this, again, family, is that Brett and his wife, Ashley, met at USC. I met my wife, Sapna, at USC, and the four of us have known each other for the same amount of time, 22 years. My wife, Sapna, used to come to architectural review just when we were friends in school, like come over to the studio and see our reviews and whatnot. So she's been in architecture training for about as long as I have.
I'm guessing she's not an architect or in this profession.
She's not. She's the smart one out of the two of us. But no, we talk a lot. We have a 2 and a 4-year-old, 2 boys, and we talk a lot about how powerful it is to be exposed to the world. And so we would love to spend time in other states or other countries. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to figure that out and how that might be possible while they're still young and somewhat mobile, and kind of how you balance all of that. But her family is originally from India. She's first generation born here. And so it's really important for us to see the world and expose our children to the world, but then also for the two of us and for me, even professionally, there's so much out in this world to see and to experience. And that's really critical to our work, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, not to get off track from the story, but that is a question I was thinking about the other day of how do you find or make, I guess, time to go and see and research and do these things? Because it takes time and energy to do it. Like, we were speaking with a partner at an office, and he's traveling constantly to see stuff. And my first question, which I didn't ask, was, how the hell do you have time to do that while you're running an office?
I think you have to. I think you have to. One, you have to make the time. You have to put it out there. You have to, set a goal or whatever that might be. You have to block that time out. and also understand that it's personally beneficial, but also beneficial to your business or to your practice and to your future clients and collaborators to have this. I mean, as architects, I think it's really interesting. It's a challenge, but it's an exciting one. As architects, especially when we're focusing on high-end custom residential, as an architect, you almost are expected to know architecture, fashion, music, art, culture, restaurants, chef. Like it's almost like that's the expectation, and that's fine because I happen to be passionate about all of those things, because each one of those arts, performing arts, whatever it might be, all that kind of feeds into this creative world in which we live. And traveling is just so important, right? It's such a part of that. We took our eldest son, before he turned 1, actually, we put him on a plane and went to Paris for a week over Christmas and New Year's. And we packed him around freezing cold Paris in a big jumpsuit, and it was so fun, because who knows if he's not going to ever really recall those memories, but seeing photos and just, putting him in front of the paintings at the Orangerie, it's just the scale of that's just incredible. Right. and those are memories, and that's experiences, right? Experiences and memories. I mean, what's more important in this life if we're able to give that to them or to us, and then share that with our clients. Yeah, really. True.
I was wondering if you could kind of describe the landscapes of Santa Fe and the Southwest and those drives for people who are listening and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think, driving through California, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, I mean, the horizon line is just so prevalent, right? I think if you're standing on the beach in Los Angeles and you look at the ocean, I mean, the horizon is just kind of omnipresent, right? And when you drive in a car for sports or to go see your family or whatever it is, and you sit, I would sit in the back seat for 6 hours, 8 hours, and just watch, listen to music on whatever it was, the Walkman or the Discman at that point. And just watch, these trees and grass and sagebrush and the changing of the light over, far off ridge lines and mountains. And it would have never dawned on me that would have such an imprint, but I think it did. And the Southwest, I mean, New Mexico is I think their slogan is the land of enchantment. And you go out there and you can sit and watch these kind of crazy rainstorms come in and see these clouds. And then you get flash floods, which are powerful and dangerous, but also beautiful. And you just see, I think, the landscape just being really, really prevalent.
I'm a little bit afraid that we're going to do this road trip, and then once we get out there, I'm never going to want to come back to
you might not. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Because also, I think as architects, Brett and I talk a lot about vernacular architecture and trying our architecture to be of a place. And I think whether it's seeing 5th, 6th generation ranches in Nevada, or going out and seeing, Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, or just seeing, indigenous cultures and what they built and how they interact with the landscape from a structure and a dwelling standpoint. It's awesome as an architect to really see that. I think I kind of wish I could go back to school and become an anthropologist and be like a architectural anthropologist or something like that. It's just so fascinating to me.
Yeah, there's definitely some aspect of that directly in architecture, but again, time is always the struggle.
Always.
It's a really fascinating subject, though, that you know, those experiences and that scenery and those landscapes would have such a strong impact. And to my eye, and I'm sure to a lot of people, your guys' work, you can feel those landscapes and whatever essences there are being channeled in the work in some way. But I've never been able to put into words what exactly is happening. And I'm wondering if you guys can, or if is it a subconscious thing that takes place, or are there on the extreme end of that? I'm not saying you would do this, but like rule sets, or like what is the breakdown of how that works?
It's interesting. I don't think that our process is not like a rules set or dictated process in that way. A process is critical to us, and we have a process. It's more intuitive. I think it strikes a balance between intuitive and controlled and defined. But in terms of in terms of trying to put that into words, I think that we would absolutely love, if people could describe and really feel from our work that, one, it belongs in that space that it exists. Like it just naturally feels like it's a part of that place. Maybe even to the point where it was like anthropologic in the sense that we just discovered it. I think that that's kind of how we feel about a lot of our projects through the design phase, is that we're not dictating, we're not forcing an LA architecture onto the Arizona landscape, for example, but we're kind of discovering this ruin or something that's always been there, and then inhabiting it. I think for us, it's interesting thinking back to some of our first projects here in Los Angeles before we kind of expanded outside of LA and California and into across the country. We have worked on some pretty intense hillside homes here in Los Angeles. And I think that by nature of that and the investments that are put into the property, just from a land value standpoint, you end up interacting with the hillside, with the earth a lot in these hillside homes in LA. And we take that approach on almost every single project that we do, whether it's in LA or outside. And I think that talking about how a structure interacts with the land quite literally in its grading and its siting and its orientation, I think our instinct is always to camouflage it, sink it, hide it, make it feel like it's always been there. And I think that's just a gut reaction that we have, because we really, it's funny, we're not I think the work that we produce as a studio is not the work that's like flashy or kind of has a sign out front saying, hey, look over here. We're very much like, oh, you don't even know it's there until you discover it. And then there's this, I think, feeling of discovery and anticipation, almost at all these different little sequences throughout the structures. I think that's our general approach to just architecture in general.
Yeah.
And maybe that's indicative or kind of comes from the fact that you can't find much on me and Brett on the website on the
there
internet.
There we go. Full circle. That's great.
Well, but also our clients are very private people. I think that when you think about the type of projects that we're working on, which are mainly single family homes, these are very private individuals. They want peace and quiet. They want spaces to have, intimate experiences with their family and private experiences. And so I think we relate to that on many different levels. And I think our architecture, or the way that we approach architecture, really does fit that. I mean, privacy is really important to us personally, really important to our clients. And so that kind of all fits together.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's also, I think, just a really interesting idea that you would have a modern or contemporary type of architecture, but when you look at it, it feels like it belongs with the landscape, and you almost can't imagine the two not existing without each other. And that's a very like bizarre and amazing and tricky thing to accomplish, I think. Because there's a lot of modern architecture where you see it, it's like, someone plopped this down in the middle of whatever site.
And it's particularly, I think, maybe more difficult for modern architecture to feel that way, right? If you go to the French countryside and you build it within the local vernacular, of course it looks like it belongs because everything else looks the same, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But when you do like very modern architecture, how do you do that, in a thoughtful way and in a new way that maybe no one else around has been doing it?
Yeah, I think if we were, just to use your example, if we were to do a home in the French countryside, I think we would absolutely want to take the local materials and number one, use those, whatever they might be, right? Yeah. And so from a material standpoint, from a local craftsperson standpoint, that structure should be of a place. And from there, then you get into, okay, well, what's the floor plan design? It can really come down to like, is it a sloped or a flat roof? And I think that we're comfortable with both. Actually, we're working on more projects now with sloped roofs than we have before because we're working in areas that we haven't worked before. And that's just one, it may be required by local jurisdiction, but that doesn't mean that we can't design a quote unquote modern structure with all the amenities and still balance that with a sloped roof. Language. I think we still approach those projects with, okay, then what are the connections of these sloped roofs? What's the material of the sloped roof? I mean, I think we'd be really excited to do a very historically accurate slate roof and just kind of investigate what that means, because you have the texture of the slate, you have the size of the slate, you have all those things that kind of come from just really how a local craftspeople or vendors work.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think we don't really come to any project with any really preconceived notions about what the form has to be or has to look like. I think we spend a lot of time with our clients and collaborators up front talking about, how does this structure need to function for you? I think one, we've found through conversations with some of our more recent clients that have worked with multiple architects in the past, that we focus heavily on program discussion, square footage, budget at the very beginning of a project, because those are key parameters that would signify success or failure in a project at the end. If we don't know what we're designing from a square footage standpoint, from a program or bedroom count or how they want to live, then what are we designing for? Then we're just form making. Yeah. And the truth is, we're not really interested in form making in and of itself. We're not. We're interested in providing a form that works for the client, how they want to live. And often early on, we're asking the questions quite simply, how do you want to live on this property? And some clients are taken aback. They've never been asked that question before. And it seems like the most basic of questions. Yeah. What is this for? Right? What are we doing here? Is this a home for a couple? Is this a home for a couple and their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren? Is this a legacy property? Do you want this to be handed on, down the line? And all of that really comes together to what is the goal of the project.
Yeah, that's super well said, and I know Marina and I both agree with it. It is sometimes, to me, actually shocking that there are probably a large number of architecture and design offices who don't approach it that way, or at least maybe not to the full degree that you do, but at least a little bit. Yeah. And we've definitely come across cases where so-and-so client worked with someone in the past, and like they asked 0 questions. Yeah. I'm like, how does that even work? Because this is not I mean, I think that applies to any type of building, frankly, but even more so to someone's home. I'm like, if you don't know how they plan on living, what are you doing exactly? You're form making, as they say. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think Brett and I, early on, we found out that you can't design the program of a house by designing multiple floor plans, because then you're just spinning your wheels. And we found that early on. and from a business standpoint, you're burning fee because you're spending hours that you're not being compensated for necessarily. So it all kind of feeds together. So we found that, hey, and we love this part of it. Let's really try to and work and spend time and invest in learning who our clients are and establishing relationships with them, because that trust and that familiarity really will pay back dividends throughout the course of the project, because we do really need to empathize with how they live currently, how they've lived in the past, what are those experiences that have imprinted onto them. And the most basic question early on was, it's always really funny and kind of interesting from a psychological standpoint. If you're designing for a couple, I always like to use the bathroom sink conversations. Do you want two sinks? Do you want one sink? Are they on the same side of the room? Are they side by side? Are they back to back? Are they in separate bathrooms? Because over the course of years of living in a home, those decisions form patterns, and those patterns influence experiences, and et cetera, et cetera. And if you just take that and then you kind of expand that to, okay, you have a young family. Do you want to be next to your kids' bedrooms for your bedroom? Do you want to are they separate wings? And all those conversations, that has nothing to do with design. It has everything to do with life and daily experience. Mm-hmm. So we kind of just take that example, and we may have 3 or 4 meetings with clients where we're not talking about design. We're talking about function and lifestyle and experiences, and maybe we'll show some inspirational images to kind of get their reaction to materiality or detail or large amounts of glazing, small amounts of framed views, and we kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I love it, and that's the fun part if everyone's on the same page, I think. Your story it's not really totally related, but it reminded me that it's an anecdote, so I don't know if it's true or not, but someone had once, an architect told me that Richard Meyer had designed a house, and I think in the primary bedroom on the ceiling, he had a giant, like, floating, suspended part of the ceiling that came down that basically divided the space from left to right. And then the couple eventually got divorced after they moved into the house. And so the rumor was that that bedroom led to their divorce.
You can save or make a couple, yeah.
But I mean, how I guess to flip it, make an argument that the spaces we design do not influence behavior. Make that argument, right? Yeah. I think I think if any of us kind of think back to the homes that we grew up in, or the spaces that we've lived in, I think if you really sat down and kind of critically thought about how those spaces have impacted positively, negatively, or maybe neutrally, I think it's a worthwhile investigation. I mean, I don't know. I could, because of us moving, I've lived, let's say, in 3 or 4 homes as a child. And it's funny, I never thought about it until really recently, but I could draw every single floor plan of those homes, and that structure, or those structures, become the background to memories and life experience. I mean, how powerful is that, right? So it's really, I think it's important for us to acknowledge as architects the responsibility that we have in what we design, because ultimately it's the built environment that impacts our lives. Really, I mean, that may sound dramatic, right? But I think it's absolutely true.
No, I think it's true. I think people might be thinking, "Oh, you guys are biased, you're architects," which might be true, but I think objectively it is true. You had mentioned the word vernacular architecture, and I think it's really interesting, and it ties into the part of the conversation about you had given the hypothetical example of if you had to do a house in the French countryside, and how maybe roughly you would
twist our arms. We'd love to.
Watch out! There's a French person listening to this.
There you go. Let's do it.
How you might do it, but I kind of like the example of you had mentioned just some small things, like, okay, think about the structure, the materials, and how things are done there. as a more nuanced way to approach it, because I think the mistake that people make when they hear or think of the word vernacular or architecture is just to assume it's a copy-paste approach, a superficial copy-paste of I don't know. They have shutters, so we have shutters, even though the shutters don't match the window side, but at least we have shutters, so now it's like the same style.
Sure. Well, I guess on the shutters, for example, just to take a kind of architectural language component, right? I think for us, it'd be like, hey, if we're doing a home in South Carolina and shutters actually do perform some sort of function for the weather, the climate, et cetera, there's nothing wrong with a shutter. And I mean, how powerful would it be if you had a single story home, the floor to ceiling glass, and you had floor to ceiling shutters that acted like louvered screens or something like that? I think you can take that and really run with it and just look at it in a different way, and still have components of history and whatnot. But the other, I think when we say vernacular, we really mean indigenous to that part of the world, right? I think that both Brett and I really enjoyed our history courses at USC, and part of that is learning about, quote unquote passive green systems, or quote unquote green. In history, those were just ways to survive, right? Especially in desert climates, in really tough climates for humans to survive. You had to adapt or throughout history, people have adapted to their own environments. And so when we say vernacular, I think it's really like of a place, back to like, and maybe this is just us working in the West and whatnot, but what are the native tribes that settled this land? How did they live? What were their structures? And whether that's here in Europe or whatnot, it's like, what are those basic components of structure and survival? And let's go from there. I think it's less about what did, European settlers bring with them, right? I think it's more of that specific place.
Okay. Gotcha.
That to us, and maybe the definition, I haven't looked up the definition of vernacular, but I think when we refer to that, that's kind of what we're referring to. I think it's really a question of, okay, how far back in history do you take it? Right?
This is true. This is true.
It's about the origins, really.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So I want to track back the story on how you got into architecture, right? You moved
why
around
architecture?
and ended up at USC, but what kind of like turned the light bulb on and was like, architecture is what I'm going to be doing?
It's interesting. It's like so much maybe in life it's organic and happenstance and whatnot. But so growing up on the ranch, I think, thinking back as to the impacts of that on me personally, my dad was a trained forester. And so we would go out and we would cut down trees and make firewood, and we would take the transit and survey the corner points of the property and fence lines and whatnot. And so we were always doing things with our hands. And I think, we had a massive, he had a great shop filled with all sorts of equipment. He also is a jeweler. And so he's just used to working with his hands. And so we learned from him and from my mom grew up on a farm in San Jose, actually, on an orchard. And so they're both used to working outside and on their hands and knees and in the dirt and whatnot. So I think construction, fabrication, working with tools, I think that welding, all of that was a part of my life, just daily life. It was just part of maintaining and operating a ranch. We built a cabin up the mountain, which was pretty cool. It was like a 24 by 24 foot cabin, but my parents found some really cool technology, essentially 2 sheets of plywood with styrofoam or high density insulation in between, and like a modular construction. They weren't doing it because it was modular. They were doing it because it made sense from a from a cost standpoint, from a fabrication standpoint, from a timing and construction standpoint. And so we built this cabin with our hands, and we helped, and that was a really great experience. But even after all that, when it comes to like whatever it is, sophomore, junior in high school, I went and shadowed a local architect. So the town I grew up in was like 1,200 people, very small town. And the big city was Elko, Nevada, which is a town of about 35,000 when I was there. It's probably about 50,000 now. And I went and shadowed a local architect, and that was a really great experience for me. And so when I applied to schools, I was either going to be a doctor or an architect.
Oh, no.
and
Pretty different. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one of those things like, I don't know. I mean, you're a kid. Like, how could you know? I was interested in architecture. No one in my family was an architect, but my mom was kind of a home trained artist. She's a pretty amazing watercolor. And then my older brother is a really, really talented illustrator. He went to the Academy of Art in San Francisco for illustration. So the art, my younger brother is a writer. So arts are in there somewhere, but I think I'm much more of a controlled person. Brett and I are self-admitted control freaks for sure. So I think that wanted to come out of me, but who knows if I got into some different schools, maybe I'd be a doctor right now. I don't know, but I got into USC School of Architecture and kind of went from there. So it wasn't, I took one mechanical drafting course in high school, and I thought that was interesting. I liked Legos as a kid, but it wasn't one of those things where it was like, oh, I was a toddler and I was going to be an architect or an engineer. That wasn't the course for me, I guess.
When you shadowed the architects whilst you were in a high school, right? It was
high school.
What was that experience like?
It was probably like one or two Saturday afternoons or Friday afternoons or whatever, where I'd drive into Elko and like saw the studio. At that point, it's kind of crazy. They're still using blueprints, so the whole office smelled like the chemicals used in blueprints, and it was interesting. I think just seeing drawings, and it's not like I was involved in the process. I probably just visited a studio like maybe even once, maybe twice. But then when I got to school and first semester at USC, something clicked, and I think just loved it. Just absolutely loved it.
I'm not super familiar with the program at USC. I didn't go there for school. I've only sat on a few crits, but I did. Yeah. Actually, my first introduction to architecture properly was a USC summer camp in high school.
Okay. Yeah. So that was they did. I think they're still doing that. I hope they're still doing that summer camp. It was awesome. Probably,
yeah. And I think it was my junior summer, so a summer before senior year, perhaps. And it was, I think, 2 or 4 weeks, something like that. And there's maybe 50 kids or something. And compared to my experience at Cal Poly and other schools, the things you do in the summer camp are very similar to the first few exercises you do in first year. Abstract.
Sure.
I think there's some kind of cube exercise.
Always the foam core cube. That's right.
The cube, and then there's like a meditative space, and I was like hooked from the first few nights. Everyone's up late working, cutting cardboard, having pizza, talking. I was like, this is awesome. If this is what school's gonna be, then I'll do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had, I think we're very fortunate at USC the year that we started. We have a really great group of very talented architects that Brett and I were in that class. We have like a group of like 22 friends that have at this point in our careers either own their own offices or have become, senior position in established offices throughout LA and across the country. And we still keep in touch, and it's a really great group. So I think that I wasn't alone in enjoying that first year. We were kind of all in that together, but I think for us, the USC education was very conservative, but from my standpoint, in a positive way. I mean, very modernist history at USC. This was really before we used CAD in second or third year, but up to that point, we were all hand drawing, whether it was by pencil or ink on Mylar. I think I think Brett and I are very proud to say that we were the last class at USC our year to use ink on Mylar. Incredible experience, and I loved it. So we had a very, I think, traditional modernist education at USC, which has a rich history of alumni that are, amazing architects. And so we're very much of that school.
Yeah.
Drawings matter. I think in our recent monograph, we spent a lot of time on the line drawings and the artwork in the book, because floor plans really matter to us, sections really matter to us, that these kind of classic forms of architectural communication, in addition now to VR and renderings and all those things, but it's a kind of variation of communication. I mean, we speak a different language, verbal, written, drawn. It's really about communicating with people.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that you're including the floor plans in the book because, and I think that's great, and the floor plans should actually exist much more often in publications and out there, because it's really kind of, like the foundation of the project, and also what architects really spend their time on in order for the project to become real. And the fact that the projects only end up being focused on the final product and
the photographs
and, the publication and all of that, kind of dismiss like all the work it took to get there. So I think showing all of those plans and drawings and even iteration and all of the, sketches that didn't make it through and all of that stuff, just to kind of explain to people what it takes to get to that point,
Yeah, we recently in the studio, as a part of actually this retreat that we were talking about, we're going to prepare a document essentially communicating to our clients, whether they're potential or current clients, all the various forms of representation that we have. And, whether it's a site plan, a floor plan, a section, axonometric, perspectives, VR, renderings, all those things, just to show, because everyone consumes information differently and uniquely. And I think part of us working in custom residential is that we have a process, but we try to customize that process to our individual clients so that they can better experience the process in general. And everyone takes information differently. I mean, floor plans for us are so critical. I think we are very rational in the way that we approach floor plans, in the sense that walls line up, there are controlling axes, there are structural grid lines that lead to efficiency. And I think part of why we do drawings is to show relationship, but also to show a floor plan doesn't have to be a complex or flashy looking drawing for the spaces to be very dynamic. And I think that's one of the reasons that we decided to show the floor plans in the book and on our website, because the floor plans are very simple. From our point of view, the floor plans are very simple, in some ways overly simplified. And that just leads into spaces that are filled with furnishings and landscape and views and light, and the architecture just becomes the background to all of that. And we're not just okay with that. That's the intention, is that the architecture goes away. It's not about the architecture. It's about what happens within the architecture.
That's interesting. I'm glad you said that, because one of the things that I'm struck by with your work, in particular, is how simple the floor plans are. Because you look at the photographs, you look at the whatever else, and you're like, wow. And you look at the floor plan, you're like, wait a second, but there's nothing here. And it's really, really cool.
It's visually simple, but complex in its execution. Because when you boil down the language to 3 or 4 items, you better nail those 3 or 4 items, because they're not hiding. There's no way to cover them up. And that's where it goes to the craft and the execution and the documentation and all that rigor to get that form to its beauty and simplicity, right? Simplicity from a drawing is quite basic, but in its execution is very complex and difficult. And I think that's what our entire studio just kind of, loves. It loves the challenge of that. And then you take that simple form and you put it into a very dynamic landscape and all the beauty of just raw nature as a reference. It can be very powerful.
It almost infuses with the architecture. I'm just thinking about some of the work.
Yeah, again, it's like it's if we're doing a stone wall on a site, why would we bring in stone off-site? Like, we want to use that stone from that property. We want to use the wood from that property if we can. We want to make every decision to make that structure feel like it belongs wherever it lives.
A moment ago, you were mentioning putting together a booklet or package or something of the different types of documentation that you guys can and do produce. Was that, just so we're clear, so was that partially so that new clients can see what you offer and then you can have a discussion with them earlier on to figure out what they resonate with or what they understand more easily? It's and
really just to show our process. I think that the number one question that we get asked by potential clients is what's your process? How do you get from an initial conversation to these built projects that are then documented and shared? And we've just been trying to come up with a very direct but effective, right, and simplified way of communicating that. I think instead of showing a 60-page document from design meeting 1 to design meeting 6 and then DD and then CD and then CA, it's like let's kind of cherry pick the drawings or the forms of communication that best relate to that point of the process, and let's just display it and show that. And by nature of that, we can then have conversations and kind of fill in the gaps. So it's trying to communicate, because clients are very excited. They come in, and we've had a lot of conversations leading up to, executing an agreement and getting going on the formal design process. And then we sit down and we're really just talking a lot. We're having conversations, and they're like, well, where are the pretty pictures? When does that start? And so we almost have to temper that excitement and say, no, we're building that foundation. We're going to get there. But in order for us to design something that ultimately resonates with you and the property, we need to have these conversations. It's fun.
Do you guys have like a set of questions to generate those conversations, or is it just very loose and organic and you kind of see where it takes you?
Yeah, we have kind of formalized our onboarding process, just making sure that we get all the necessary information, survey, soils report, all of that. But when it comes to the conversation, I think one of the things that Brett and I focus a lot on is just connecting with the client. And that's like this, we're having a conversation, and it could be a series of conversation over dinner, drinks, in the studio, on the property, in their existing home. I think visiting a client's current home is really, really critical. We want to see how they live, how they have lived in that space, talk about some of the things that are pros and cons for them, ask them some questions that they've never thought of, and just go from there. So it's less formulaic. I think we know, and every client's different, and the conversation may go in another direction, and that's great. Because all clients are different. And again, going back to, we're delivering a custom product. And so we want to, on some level, tailor that process to them.
I don't know if it's the kind of stars aligning in the universe or what, but there's a number of offices. So actually a few months ago, what we started to do was put together, I don't know if it's exactly the same thing what you're describing, but a process PDF that explains to clients for a number of reasons. One, just the basic there are about 7 or 8 big phases that happen in a project, because a lot of clients don't even know that. And then kind of show them approximately what kind of deliverables and things they're going to see from us that we produce at each of those phases, and some bullet points at each page saying this is what takes place and whatever, to solve, again, the basic problem of people not knowing what is supposed to happen, first of all, and so they can have an expectation of what it's like to work with us. And it ends up being that a number of officers we spoke with recently have started just recently doing the same thing, because I think part of it is that the offices we speak with, interior design and architecture, a lot of them have realized that the clients don't know, and that even more specifically in the examples I'm thinking of, that this interior design office, they have a hard time explaining verbally to somebody what makes us different in our process when that client is speaking with a few interior designers, and the other interior designers are saying, well, we're just as good too, but you have no kind of visual document to say, well, this is actually what we do. We're not just saying we do it, but we actually produce 3D images or whatever it is.
Sure. I think it's a tool for sure. It's something that we're developing, but I don't think it's necessarily critical, but it is helpful. I think we have conversations with our potential clients where, of course, we actually encourage them to go and interview other architects and interior designers, because it's good for everyone. Really, we're talking about establishing a relationship that at minimum is 3-4 years, just with the design, permitting, and then construction process. I mean, I think a minimum process for us is 3 years from start of design to move in, right, on a home. And we don't want that relationship just for those 3 years. We want that relationship to continue. And I think it comes down to, well, our approach is that it comes down to people. I think if an owner or potential client is interviewing us, most likely the firms that they are interviewing are all competent, qualified firms. From that point, it really comes down to process, like we're talking about. But the process is really facilitated by people. And you can have the best process, you can have it detailed out, you can have it fully documented, it could be very, very professional and great for the client. But if the facilitator, if the relationship is not compatible with that client, it's doomed from the beginning. And so Brett and I spend a lot of time on people with potential clients. We spend a tremendous amount of time and energy and thought to the culture of our studio, because clients aren't just interacting with us, they're interacting with our team. And a client is going to know, a potential client is going to walk into a studio and is going to feel that energy of that team right away. We touched on this on another conversation, but it's so important. And that's where cultivating a positive, collaborative culture in the studio, it's not just the right thing to do as a business owner from a people standpoint, but it helps clients, it helps the process, it goes down the line to all of the consultants and the builders. And I think that for us, it's process is important, but what's more important are the people involved in that process. And we spend a lot of time focusing on that.
Yeah, that's great. Sure. That's great. And you're right. So we had the pleasure of visiting your office and seeing you guys. And I had remarks in that conversation, like it's a beautiful office, first of all, but also it had good energy. And I had said, like, there are some offices, and maybe you would agree with this, where they do beautiful work and everyone knows their work, and maybe the partners come off a certain way in interviews and whatnot. But then you visit their office and you get kind of this it's kind of tingly spider sense, like this is some kind of strange energy happening here that's not great.
Yeah. I think that we don't say this to be kind of lofty, but I think that our generation of architects and those that we went to school with and in our class, and some of the other guests that you've had on this podcast, we want to change the way that architects are perceived in the world, and the way that the process works. we are not, speaking of us specifically, we are not the architects of an older generation that dictate what the client is going to have for their project.
Mm-hmm.
Who are we to say that? On some level, we are a facilitator at the greatest, kind of the highest level. We're a facilitator of what the client needs and wants, but maybe they don't know how to communicate that. Maybe they don't even know the questions to ask. And so we facilitate that process. That's not to downplay or undermine any of the other aspects of the work that we do and the creativity and the hard work and whatnot. But we're here, this is a service-based industry. We are here to service the client, facilitate the process, and give them ultimately a structure that works for them and the life they want to live. And if we don't deliver that, if we only deliver a beautiful object at the end of the day, that's not success. That's not the goal. And in fact, that's a failure, right? We want them to walk into these homes and feel like this is their home, that they have created this along with us in collaboration, and it should feel, they should have comfort in that space. It's a very difficult thing to do, but that's the goal.
Do you ever have challenges with certain clients? And this probably, maybe the answer to this has to do with just having the right fit with architect and client pairing. But with folks who don't want to be that involved, and they're more like, I don't have time, just I'll spend like half an hour with you like once every 2 weeks, and I can approve stuff. I'm happy to do that, but I'm not going to go through this journey.
Well, exactly. I think that's a really good question. The spending time with your client is absolutely critical. Access to your client is absolutely critical. We work on a few very complex projects where there are management teams and we don't get that interaction with the client. And Brett and I find that challenging for sure, because that is outside of our ideal process, right? I think with like every architect or every business owner, you can't control everything and you've got to kind of ebb and flow. But no, the ideal process is one where, and we say this in discussions with potential clients, we say at a bare minimum, we will need 2 hours of your time every 2 weeks. If you can't commit to that, and many people can't because they are extremely busy, then it's probably not the best process working with our studio. And so there is that kind of minimum commitment. On the flip side, you have some clients who are absolutely available all the time, and that comes with its own challenges. However, we would take that client and collaborator over one that is not involved or non-existent any day, because ultimately, in order for us to have a successful project, we need to manage expectations, and that comes through conversations and contact, so that when someone walks into their home, they it not only meets their expectation, but they've been a part of establishing what that expectation is. It's not us, again, dictating what it should be.
Yeah.
Do you think that's also a sign when clients are more involved in the process that they value maybe our services more than the ones that don't have the time?
I think that's not the only indicator, right? I think that someone could value our time and only be available for 2 hours every 2 weeks versus more. But it is a more enjoyable process when we get to spend more time with our clients, because we're just able to do a better job, really, in service to them and their needs, because we learn more. These really are relationships and friendships and family that we're establishing with our team and with our clients. I mean, some of our earlier projects 10 years ago, some of our clients were just having kids, and now they're, in 4th grade, 5th grade. It's crazy to watch these families grow up in homes that we've designed, along with, my family in the home that we built, and Brett, his family in the home that they built. I mean, it's firsthand kind of, it's really satisfying to see that happen, and to see families grow in the spaces that we've created.
Have you ever had to do a remodel yet of one of your projects because of that?
We have not, that's a great question. We're not there yet. We do have a few repeat clients, which is really cool, that we're working on some project, which is really great. That just kind of shows that the investment, again, in relationships and the hard work that the studio produced, 8-10 years ago is paying itself forward, right? Which is really fun, and the projects are amazing, and the people are amazing. And no, I hope, our goal, our wish and fantasy would be that the homes that we are creating, the structures we're creating, are not demolished, but are restored or renovated, and we would happily restore or renovate one of our homes rather than see it torn down, right? I think that it's the way of the world, and unfortunately, or just it is what it is, that at some point we'll see one of our structures demolished, and I'm sure that'll be a painful day. But no, we really try hard to make these homes and structures intentional, have a sense of permanence, have a sense of timelessness, so that those in the future that own or inhabit these spaces, one, understand that someone cared in the making of it, and hopefully valued enough to keep and restore it.
Yeah. Also, it's hugely, this is kind of a different topic, but it's actually massively wasteful to buy a property with a house that is perfectly good, let's say,
that's right,
and then tear it down and then build something because I want a different color,
That's right. That's right. And I think we are taking that into consideration with our clients, again, with the intention of these, like, is it a multi-generational home, for example? We talk about flexibility. We talk about, okay, this room can go from a study to a nursery to a guest bedroom, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And we try to think about the flexibility of these spaces, because you're absolutely right. It's incredibly wasteful. And I think when we're faced with the question of, hey, there's a home on this beautiful piece of property, can we try to investigate for sure if we can keep that structure or modify that structure to stay. First and foremost, we go through that exercise. We don't just approach a property saying, oh, let's just demolish it and start with a clean slate.
Yeah. I think it was a clip on Instagram, and there was an architect or professor, somebody in this kind of space, and was talking about the issue of sustainability, essentially, right? Yeah. And his point was, the architecture professions and educators were always talking about different ways to build sustainably, using sustainably sourced materials, various technologies, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, but no one's talking about the fact that the truest way to be the most sustainable is to build things that last a long time, and then to reuse structures if they're good. And he's like, because actually, and obviously you know this, but construction generally with a new home or any building, there's a lot of waste, like an incredible amount of waste.
Yeah. I read or listened to an interview with David Chipperfield. I think it was, a few months ago. And the evolution of his practice is really fascinating, where at this point he essentially has started his own owner's rep brand or team within his global company that goes out and identifies buildings that he thinks could be salvaged and reused, and then goes through a process of creating an RFP to essentially adaptively reuse structures. And it's so fascinating, and at the scale that he's practicing, it's really incredible. But that idea is really, really interesting. And I think for us, sustainability, there's the kind of greenwashing of things. And I think that for us, we're focused on buildings that make sense in their environment, right? So overhangs, solar orientation, thermal, just trying to make these spaces less based on systems, active systems, and more based on passive systems. Yeah. And to us, that also goes back to the vernacular conversation. Yeah. Now, we are, of course, implementing systems whether they're, solar PV, solar hot water, geothermal. I mean, any of these systems, but I think we're also very conscious from a material standpoint of using local materials. So back to of a space and of a region, we're not really interested necessarily in saying, oh, wow, we have to have this huge piece of glass that's coming in from Portugal, right? No, we're going to use, hey, imagine this, we're in Arizona and there are some incredible glass factories in Arizona. Let's use those and let's work within those limits. So keeping materials local, using local stone, using local wood. I mean, all of that, I think just makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's our approach to it. We tend to not have a lot of active green systems. We try to implement more passive strategies.
It makes sense. And, in a funny way, it's kind of like back to basics for the profession.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
I was remarking the other day, this is more to do with students in education. And it's great when students learn about the various systems, and I guess the opposite of passive might be the active systems or whatever technologies.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
honestly, because we were being asked, I think by like a second year student questions with us, and I was like, what you need to focus on are the basics. Like learn how to do something that makes sense without relying on a bunch of fancy tech. Like really,
that's right. That's right. Where's the wind? Where's the wind coming from? Where's the sun going to be in the winter versus the summer? How are your overhangs working? Where's your water coming from? How do you reuse water? How do you capture water? All those are all passive, and it in our kind of use of the word vernacular, because you have to do that to survive, right? If you don't. We haven't had the opportunity, I'll say yet, to do something, off the grid, but I think it'd be really great. Because water, power, and waste. How do you deal with all that without public, utilities?
Yeah. Well, I mean, your experience on the farm probably will come in handy at that point.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we weren't off the grid, but we had to regulate our well water. We were on septic. Like we were pretty outside of electric generation. I mean, we were pretty self-sustaining, and I think that probably had some impact on it. The cabin that we built up the hill was absolutely off the grid. So that was actually fun.
Zooming out a little bit, I was wanting to talk about the profession of architecture, and I'm curious to know if, in your view, whether or not you think that the general public, and this might be focused on the single family space or not, has an understanding of what architects do, or do you think most people just they don't understand? And if that's the case, is that a problem for us? Us meaning the profession.
Sure, the profession. I think the profession as a whole can always do a better job of explaining what we do and how we add value to society, just globally. It's funny for a field that is so reliant on various forms of communication. Sometimes we could be really bad people-to-people communicators. Right? I think but it's a very challenging thing, especially in public spaces, and kind of interventions in neighborhoods and whatnot. I think that, single family residential is quite different in that sense. Right. But I think we could always do better. And I think part of that for us is, we love doing single family homes. I think we do want to branch out and start getting into some other, cultural institutions and some more public facing projects. But I'm not sure exactly how to change that. It's a really challenging question, actually.
It's funny because a few parts ago in the conversation, you were talking about your process, and more or less getting to know the client at the beginning is a big part of it. And I think Marina had brought up the subject of kind of a questionnaire, and you said, well, it's a lot of it is there's that, yes, for onboarding, but then also just having a good conversation and getting to know people. And I have this experience every so often where we meet a lot of different architects, obviously, and sometimes some of them, I'm not saying they're bad architects, but they are horrible at holding a conversation, almost to like a humorous level. And I have to say, my first thought is, and they do single family as a lot of architects do. Yeah. My first thought is, how do you ever get any clients? How do you work with anybody? Because if you can't ask questions or hold a conversation like a normal human being, how are you going to investigate and understand who you're designing for?
Well, I think that goes back to your question about what does the public think that we do, right? Because a lot of clients may hire the said architect not knowing that there's an alternative, right? Or not knowing really what it is that we do. I think that it's really funny how film and television really has taken the role of the architect, and with the, running around New York with the model or the roll of papers and the roll of drawings and whatnot. It's just really funny
with the hard hat.
And there are aspects of that, but it's very stereotypical and almost it's an oversimplification or generalization of it, right? But that being said, from a residential standpoint, I don't know the percentage, but it's a very, very small percentage of people that will ever get that experience, right? And so that's also part of it. And even if you're not building a custom home, the day-to-day person walking down the sidewalk may never interact with an architect in the process. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Maybe if there's an apartment building around the corner and there's a neighborhood meeting, right? But so I think, public outreach, public, interaction and communication, I think does happen when it's needed. But I think many people, I don't even know if Brett and I always joke, like, I think our spouses know what we do, but our parents don't.
I think my dad still doesn't quite understand either.
How can they?
But it's a really good point. How can they? Yeah.
So we shouldn't also have the expectation that they should know what we do, right? I mean, we interact with doctors and accountants and other professionals, but as architects or just people in the world. But the architect is a very specialized profession.
It is true. Also, a while ago in the conversation, you had mentioned VR, and I was very curious as to whether or not you guys use VR in the office, or something you're interested in doing. Do you think it's a good thing?
Well, I think whether we're interested or not, I think we have to, again, going back to we can't be complacent, right? And we have to adapt to current technologies. And VR is one form of communication that can be very helpful for some clients. We are constantly adapting VR for our projects in the way that we either choose to represent materiality or not. Right now, we use VR very intentionally as if it is a foam core model or a chipboard model, where it is completely devoid of materials. It's really about solid versus transparent. It's about scale. It's about height of ceiling, width of space, etc. For some clients, that's very helpful. Others, it's very confusing and makes them nauseous.
Really?
Nauseous, right.
It's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox for sure. And we're constantly questioning how we use it in our process. It's interesting. We don't use it on every project because not every client responds to it. Some love it and they're like, "Oh wow, that's very helpful," and others are like, "I don't need to see that again." And it's very different. And some will be like, I don't want to look at a floor plan again. I only want to see axonometric drawings from the Revit model. I only want to see perspectives. And it's like, okay, great. Then we're not going to try to, why would we then spend time on showing you a 2D floor plan when it's not being, consumed. It's not being understood. Interesting. Yeah. So I think VR is in that for sure. Some people love it. We tend to use it less with goggles and more with an iPad
Mm.
or augmented reality, right? I think one way it's really helpful is that you can geo-point a view, walk out onto a site, and show them the form and the view that the form frames on that specific point,
Mm-hmm.
which is very, very powerful. We've done that also on some kind of crazy topography where we've built scaffolding so that you can get above grade as to where the future structure is going to be, along with kind of AR. And that's really fun because then you get to see, I mean, the clients that we're working with are just, they're so excitable and so passionate that when you show them a new form of communication like that, just seeing their eyes just light up, it's like we're all kids just having fun. It's moments like that where like, this is what I do for a living.
Yeah. Yeah. It is pretty wild. And I guess you could probably just put on the headset if you wanted to and just walk around the site. I mean, assuming that it's great and you don't trip over something.
Yeah, it's funny that total immersion VR, I think we use less. I think it's more like on the iPad, on the phone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think it was last night I was listening to an NPR piece about VR wellness. VR medicine, where now there are studies being done to counteract the negative effects of people using VR, whether it's for like training or in their life, where their sense of balance and sense of sight is being altered by their time in VR. And so there are doctors focusing on ways to give healing from VR, which is terrifying.
Wow.
And the antidote is more VR, but with a different colored lens.
I mean,
more medicine to the medicine. Wait,
yeah,
so
right?
how do you have anything that you do to keep the client exciting during, let's say, the cities phase or the construction phase? Because we all know how exciting they are during the design phase, because they just start seeing what the project is going to look like. But then there is a huge gap, between when that's done and when the project is finished. So how do you keep them excited until the end?
That's a great question, and it definitely happens. Brett and I kind of kick ourselves quite often. Years ago, we saw an infographic that we cannot find that was essentially like the psychological roller coaster of a client through the process. And it's like they're really excited in design, and then you get to DDs and consultants, and it just like plummets down. And then they see like construction and some framing, and it gets up, and then they see the drywall, it gets smaller and it plummets down. So all these like psychological moments are like the apexes and whatnot. We can't find that graphic, but it's very real.
Yeah.
And through DD or CDs, often what we're finding in our process is that we're kind of maintaining two sets of documents, and Revit and the way that we have the team is set up our kind of Revit process. It's quite efficient, where essentially we have two sets of documents that are being developed simultaneously. One are the classic working drawings, the construction drawings, and the other are the 11x17 client packages. And those views and presentations are informing each other. So through that, we continue the design process, because design, the misnomer is it's like, okay, so we have this design process, and then you go into DD and CDs, and design stops. Mm-hmm. We're like, no, just shifts. And so we're still meeting and designing with the clients through DD and CD. It's just through a different lens of documents, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So you talk about maybe like details and kind of like
absolutely
refinements of everything.
Yeah, and since we're a full service architecture firm, and also interior architecture and interior design, so those conversations are happening kind of simultaneously throughout the entire process, regardless of where the formal documents are. And it's really not a burdensome process to kind of maintain those two document sets. And so we're getting into, cabinetry and stone and tile appliances, plumbing fixtures, cabinetry detail, reveal detail, interior door jamb and door details, and kind of on down the line then to, furnishings and beautiful area rugs and wallpaper and drapery, and all those things. So the design is pretty consistent throughout the entire process.
There's a lot to decide. Even myself, I'm always kind of surprised at how many decisions have to be made. And I think that's an aspect that for sure clients most often underestimate.
Yeah.
So I read, again, I don't remember the year, but at this point it's probably 5-6 years ago, that the most current data was that for a home, the average size in the US was like 1,800 square feet or something. And that in that process of designing that average size home across the country, an architect will have made 30,000 decisions.
Where did you see that stat from? I've always wondered. I've been so tempted to try and calculate it myself. I'm serious. I've actually thought I'm going to write down.
I read that somewhere a long time ago, and
That's
again,
fantastic.
it's like that infographic. I don't know where, but I know it was 30,000, because it is interesting. In let's say the 1940s, the average size U.S. home was like 1,200 square feet, and by 2000 it had jumped to 1,800 square feet, and at that point, I think it's like, the architect. So that's the architecture.
Yeah.
Then you get into interior architecture. Then you get into loose furnishings, and it's pretty mind blowing. But it can be overwhelming, and it is overwhelming to some clients, or to a junior architect coming out of school. But it's okay. Take a breath. We've got a process. We're going to get there, and we're gonna hold your hand in the most positive way, and it's gonna be a fun experience.
30,800 square feet 6 years ago. I'm writing that down. I'm going to do a graph.
Like you have any spare time to do that.
That's right.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because otherwise the alternative route was going to be me making a tick mark in my sketchbook for every decision made in a 3-year process to see what the outcome was.
Incredible. Yeah, it's incredible.
But it's a lot. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Talking about, taking a breath and kind of managing, I guess, being overwhelmed, or even a wellness in a certain sense. Is there anything you do on a fairly regular basis to weather storms, keep calm, make sure you're not being overloaded by the number of decisions you have to make as designer, business owner, architect, et cetera, et cetera?
That's the key question to life. I think it's the direct answer is I could be better about it. I think it's a busy time in my life, and with my wife and our family, young kids, business, trying to maintain, relationships. And I think one of the things that I learned in architecture school, really, beyond design, and maybe even more important than design, is really time management. I think that in school, you have to manage your time to be able to design, but then also leave time for production and presentation. And I think that's the same for me personally and professionally, is managing time. I also think you have to be really good at compartmentalization, to be quite honest. But yeah, I think it's a daily challenge for sure. It absolutely is. I mean, I love, we get out on the weekends with the family. We'll go to museums. We'll go on hikes. I like to golf when I have the time, which is not that often right now, but I like being outside. I think part of it that is actually, again, kind of pinch me. It's part of our job, is that right now we're getting some pretty amazing opportunities working on projects outside of California on acreage with some pretty incredible people. And so we just kicked off a project in Sedona, which is a beautiful site, 8-acre site. And so I went out and I camped for 2 nights with the clients on the property, and that's incredible, right?
That's part of your job. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. There's no cell service. So, I mean, of course I miss my family for sure. I miss the kids, but those moments, I think it's really awesome. And we're very fortunate to be able to work with some clients, some great people, amazing properties. And so travel is becoming more for both, for myself, and that has its pros and cons. But one of the pros is getting out in nature. So we're not traveling to, Chicago and doing homes in the urban environment. We're traveling to Sedona or Southern Utah or Oregon or, Texas or Wyoming. So it's pretty incredible in that sense.
That's cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I was wondering, this is a very specific question, but when the two of you are interfacing with the clients and you're visiting their site, camping on the site, and whatever else, is it sometimes challenging to relay and transfer that information and that kind of essence to the team that's working on the project so they get it, if that makes sense?
I would say generally no. I think that, again, one of the benefits that we have of a great team and a great culture is that our team is an extension of the two of us. I think we've been able to form those relationships and bonds. So the typical process would be we would go out to a job site, spend some real time with the owners, talk through kind of their goals on the property, throw out some ideas just to kind of check their temperature on some things, come back to the studio, kind of iterate on some site plan options, and then we would go back to the site as a team, have the whole team travel so that they can understand the property, because it's impossible for our team to do their jobs without physically seeing the site. It's impossible. You really have to get a sense of the place, right? If we're creating these structures that are of a place, they need to experience that for themselves. And that just helps the process exponentially moving forward, whether that's a site in LA or a site in Connecticut, right? Or somewhere else. That's the exciting part of the job. So it's kind of a non-answer, I guess, back to your question.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Because I've seen offices where they don't do that, right? Everything is very, there's a lot of hierarchy and things are kind of stratified. So sometimes people work, not always, of course, but sometimes people work on the project. They're very disconnected from the project, actually, thinking about it.
No, we want our team, it's critical for our team to feel ownership, to understand the client. Brett and I are absolutely first point of contact and available to our clients at any time. However, every client meeting the team members are a part of, they have to be. They have to be able to also form their own relationships with the clients and earn and keep the client's respect, and the team does. I mean, with Brett and I traveling, with us managing the clients and projects and whatnot, the team has to be actively involved. Otherwise it wouldn't work. This office wouldn't work, right? The process would not work if the team they're not drafts people. These are architects, and in order to be architects and train them and to give them the experiences that they need to be better for our clients and for their own development, they need to be a part of the conversation. Absolutely.
Did you always know that you would have your own office?
It's a great question. I think the short answer is yes. I think Brett and I value greatly the experiences that we've had working at other studios and for other business owners. But I think we always knew that we wanted to have our own business. I think that Brett and I love architecture. We love design, but we also love business. We love the strategy of it. We love the responsibility of it. I think for me personally, it probably came from my mom. She ran a business as a sole proprietor that had at one point 350 people.
Whoa.
And just watching her kind of go through her business process, and again, a lot of pros and cons.
Yeah.
Right. Running a business is not an easy thing. I can't even imagine being, a larger size than we are. But it's an incredible opportunity, responsibility to own and operate a business, to see our team get married, raise families. We're not just responsible for the team itself, but for the families that our team has, and then for our families. So it's very rewarding in that sense. And so we often, tell our clients we're business owners first, and our business just happens to be architecture. We're very passionate about the architecture, but one can't coexist without the other, right? The architecture could not have any success if the doors don't stay open from a business standpoint. And
True.
And man, it's been, any small business owner will tell you, coming out of the Great Recession, going through a pandemic, and now where we are with, no one wants to say recession, but, the greatest inflation that we've seen, in our generation. It's like, what else as business owners, what else are we going to get thrown at us?
Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs are coming back.
Yeah,
it is a good question, but
it's tough.
Someone will have to weather the storm. Businesses will have to figure it out, and it's part of it.
And part of that is, I think, a recommitment, a doubling down to our team, because the only way that we get through this is if we're all rowing in the same direction. And I think that's we have a great team, and we have great support from our clients and collaborators, and growing, in fact, through the pandemic and just after the pandemic, that wasn't necessarily the goal, but just a kind of result of all the incremental steps that we've been taking. And it's, I'm proud of us as a team for kind of where we are. And our team knows that, they hear that from us. And at the same time, we're not done yet, in the sense, I think we feel very strongly that we're at a great point in the firm, but that this is, on some levels, we're just starting out. I think we have that mentality that there's much more to come.
Oh, well, I think that's a fantastic note to end it on. Oh, but we do have one question which we always ask, which is, what is your favorite building?
I knew you were going to ask that.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to ask that. I'm going to give you a range.
That's fine.
I'm going to give you a range. So I did study abroad in Italy, in Como, through USC, which was an incredible experience. And just seeing, I think in 6 months, I saw 14 countries or something like that, and was exposed to some pretty incredible architecture. Some spaces, maybe less the building, but some spaces. The crypt at Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty powerful space. You see a lot of what I kind of jokingly refer to as church architecture throughout Europe, which is incredible. But of course, you can get almost numb to it because you're so exposed. I think spaces like that, which are just kind of raw and just full of power, you just walk into a space and you kind of get goosebumps or something. I haven't shared this with many people, but I went in there as a student, and I found myself alone in that space, and I started chanting. almost like a meditative, like, chanting, and it was incredible, the acoustics in there and everything. I mean, it's just absolutely powerful. I think as a newer construction building, Therm Valls by Zumthor is just absolutely stunning. I experienced that space as a student, and then when our book was printed in Italy, and so my wife and I went to Switzerland and saw the book being printed, and then I finally got the chance to take her to Valls, and we were at Valls a year ago, and happened to be on my birthday, and that was an incredible experience, because that's, I think, probably my favorite structure of space. It's just so stunning. the environment, the design, the experience of it all. It's pretty incredible.
Those are great answers.
Yeah.
Great answers. What were you chanting?
It was funny. I think I was, how old was I at that point? Like, 22 or 23. I think it was like some Gregorian chant or something like that. I grew up raised pretty heavily Catholic. And so I've been exposed to a lot of that type of music, I guess, through just kind of ritual and whatnot. So it felt appropriate.
Yeah. And then there's people who came down the crypt and started joining you, and you started a band.
No, I made sure there was no one around. For sure.
Everyone would have freaked some people out. What is that noise? Well, you're in a crypt.
Another really cool. Sorry, just to break on that same trip. I was in Stuttgart, or not Stuttgart. Excuse me. I was in Austria in. I'm spacing. Where was Mozart born?
Oh. You're asking the wrong people.
Come on. Anyway, I was there for a spring break, and it happened to be Easter, and so I was in the basilica there, and I was there for Easter Vigil, and seeing some of these kind of ancient, or not ancient, but very, very historical spaces lit up only by candle. Pretty incredible. So I'm a bit of a romantic.
Salzburg, Austria.
Salzburg, yes.
That's the answer.
Salzburg. The basilica there at Salzburg for Easter Vigil, kind of all lit by candles. Pretty incredible space.
I mean, I think even if you're not, religious or even spiritual, just going into these spaces, there is something very powerful about them.
Absolutely.
That's beyond the story that, they're trying to tell you. Like, it's just the space itself just makes you feel things.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, here in Los Angeles, Our Lady of Angels by Rafael Moneo. I mean, you go in that space and it's powerful. Absolutely.
That's a really cool place. I was very lucky that in high school, I was part of a brass ensemble, and we got to play in the Lady of Our Angels, right? Yeah. And that was
Our Lady of Angels.
Wild. Yeah. It was super wild experience. I wish that I had done it, or I could have done it a little bit older, so I could remember it more clearly. But it was pretty phenomenal. A bit intimidating, frankly.
Well, absolutely, and by design, right? I mean, talk about the power of architecture in promoting an agenda, right? I mean, all over. Throughout the history of humanity, right? These structures, the power of architecture is just so it's limitless, and I think that Brett and I both feel that way, and feel that the great responsibility that we have in the construction of physical objects on this earth and what they can represent, I think is really, really is in our mind. Whether it's a home in LA or a hotel in Utah or whatever, or a museum, whatever it might be, it's a great responsibility that we take very, very, very seriously, and we enjoy it, but we take it seriously.
Awesome. Joe, thank you so much for making the time on a Friday morning. Everyone knows we record these in advance, but it's Cinco de Mayo, so it's even though it's the morning, it's margarita time.
it's margarita time for sure. Thank you both. Really, it's so fun just chatting with you guys.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button and liking and commenting on our videos.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail if you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion. Feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.